Storm took. Ruth stepped closer, tears glinting in her eyes. We heard about you and all that success, all that land. You did well for yourself, Luke, real well. He looked down, kicking at the snow. I did, maybe. But some things you can't buy back. A long silence followed, broken only by the moan of wind across the valley. Luke took the log from Samuel's trembling hands and set it down by the wall. You shouldn't be working out here alone, he said. This place looks ready to fall apart. Samuel grunted. Ain't got a choice. Storm took half the roof. Rest of the town packed up and left. But this here land's been ours 50 years. We ain't leaving it now. Luke studied the wreckage, the barn's skeleton, the broken fence, the frostbitten field where once cattle grazed. The old couple were rebuilding with nothing but their will and bare hands. Something deep in Luke stirred. Something heavy, long buried. He thought of his father, standing proud against the wind, saying, "Never walk away from your own." The sky turned crimson as evening fell. Ruth lit a small lantern and invited him inside the damaged cabin. The fire crackled weakly, barely enough to fight the cold. She poured him a tin cup of coffee, black and bitter. We've lost most everything, she said softly. But we're still breathing. That's got to count for something. Luke took a sip, grimacing at the taste. How long have you been rebuilding? Since the thaw, Samuel answered, sitting down slowly, bones creaking. Ain't much left to fix, but we do what we can. Got no help. Neighbors gone. Roof leaks, walls crack, but Ruth says we'll make it. Luke looked at their hands, calloused, bleeding, trembling, and something inside him broke. You shouldn't be lifting a damn thing anymore, he said, voice rough. Ruth smiled faintly. If we stop working, Luke, we stop living. He stared into the fire for a long moment, then stood up and looked through the window toward the dark hills. The wind was rising again. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon like bruises across the sky. The valley looked small and fragile, a place forgotten by time. Finally, he turned back, his jaw set. You're not fixing another board tonight, he said. Samuel frowned. You telling me what to do on my own land, boy? Luke stepped closer, eyes burning with quiet intensity. No, sir. I'm telling you why you're stopping. Because tomorrow this whole valley's going to change. Ruth blinked. What do you mean? Luke pulled on his gloves and grabbed his hat. I've got men working up near Bozeman. Builders, ranch hands, masons. Tomorrow they'll be here. I'll pay for the lumber, the tools, everything you need. You're done breaking your backs. I'll stop now. You've carried this valley long enough. Samuel stared at him, disbelief flickering into something softer. You'd do that? After all these years? Luke nodded, his voice quiet. I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it for my father. For what this valley gave me before I walked away. The room fell silent except for the crackle of the fire. Ruth wiped her eyes, whispering a prayer. Samuel finally smiled, just a little. Your daddy would have been proud, boy. Luke looked out the window again, watching the snow begin to fall. I hope so, he said, because tomorrow Hollow Creek rises again. Outside the horse neighed softly, and the night swallowed the valley whole. But for the first time in years, Luke Callahan felt something warm inside him, a reason to stay. Morning broke slow and pale over Hollow Creek, the light crawling across snow-dusted hills like a promise renewed. The valley, once silent and empty, began to stir with sound. The rumble of wagons, the crack of whips, and the voices of men shouting orders through the cold air. Luke Callahan stood on the ridge, his coat billowing behind him as he watched a dozen ranch hands unload lumber, bricks, and fresh supplies from 3 long carts. Horses neighed, boots stamped, and for the first time in years, Hollow Creek felt alive again. The old couple, Samuel and Ruth Miller, stood beside the ruined barn, disbelief etched deep across their faces. They'd woken to the sound of hammers and men singing. their broken homestead suddenly surrounded by workers, building frames and cutting timbers. Ruth clutched her apron, tears in her eyes, whispering, "Dear Lord." He really meant it. Luke walked down from the ridge, spurs jingling softly with each step. His gloves were off, hands roughened from work he hadn't done in years. But today he wasn't a businessman or a millionaire. He was just a cowboy again. One who remembered what it meant to sweat, to lift, to build. He joined the men, helping drive nails into fresh beams, guiding them with a steady hand. The men looked at him with quiet respect. The boss was working harder than any of them. By noon, the air smelled of sawdust and smoke. The old barn began to rise again, the new walls glinting golden under the sun. Ruth brought out hot coffee for the workers, smiling through her tears. Samuel sat on a log, his hat in his hands, shaking his head in wonder. "You know," he said, looking up at Luke, "your father and I built that barn once 60 years ago. Never thought I'd see it stand again." Luke smiled, hammering another board into place. "Then let's make sure it stands for another 60. The men worked until their breath came in clouds, and the valley rang with the sound of life. But for Luke, this wasn't just about rebuilding a barn. It was about rebuilding himself. Every nail, every plank, every shout of effort seemed to chip away at the guilt he'd carried for years. The guilt of leaving. The guilt of forgetting where he came from. As the sun began to sink behind the hills, painting the sky in amber and blood, Luke stood beside Samuel, looking over the valley. The old man spoke softly. "You did a good thing, Luke, but why come back now? You could have stayed gone, rich and proud. Why this?" Luke took a slow breath, watching the smoke rise from the rebuilt barn. "Because I was rich, Samuel, but I wasn't alive. I had money, land, everything a man could want. But none of it meant a damn thing. I'd sit in my big house and all I'd hear was the wind, just like the one that used to blow through this valley. It reminded me of what I lost, of who I used to be." He turned to the old man, his eyes steady. "I came back because I owed this place more than I ever gave it." Samuel nodded, his weathered face softening. "You can't change the past, son, but you sure can honor it." As they spoke, Ruth came out with a bundle of cloth. "Luke," she said gently, "this was your father's. Found it in the rubble years ago. Figured someday you'd come back for it." She unfolded it carefully. It was an old, worn leather hat, darkened with time but still strong. Luke took it in both hands, his throat tightening. He hadn't seen it since the day of his father's funeral. He placed the hat on his head, the brim casting a shadow across his eyes. For a moment it was as if the valley itself paused to breathe, as if the land recognized the man it had been waiting for. The next few days passed in a blur of motion. Workers repaired fences, mended roofs, and restored cabins long abandoned. Luke opened his ledgers, paying for every tool, every nail, every hour. But he didn't mind. Every dollar spent felt lighter than the fortune he'd earned. He was buying back more than land, and he was buying back belonging. Then on the fourth day, a small crowd gathered near the barn. Word had spread through nearby towns that Luke Callahan, the Millionaire Cowboy, had returned to rebuild Hollow Creek. Folks came from miles away, farmers, ranchers, widows, and drifters, people who'd once called this valley home. They stood silent as Luke climbed the half-finished fence and looked out at them. He raised his voice, rough but full of heart. "This valley was dying," he said. "The storm took our roofs, our fences, and our hope. But it didn't take us. We forgot that once. I forgot that. I left this land when it needed me most. And I can't undo that, but I can do something now. So if you've got the heart to work, if you've still got faith in what this valley stands for, then grab a hammer, A shovel, anything you can, because Hollow Creek ain't dead. Not yet. For a moment, no one moved. Then an old man stepped forward, then a young woman, then another. Soon the sound of voices rose, people cheering, picking up tools, joining the work. It was as if the valley had come back to life in one breath. That night, as the fires burned bright and laughter echoed across the snow, Samuel leaned against the fence beside Luke. "You've done a mighty thing here. Boy, maybe your father's up there smiling after all." Luke watched the lights flicker across the valley. "I hope he is. But this isn't about me anymore. It's about giving something back that lasts longer than a man's name." Samuel chuckled. "Then you've already done it." Luke looked toward the barn, now standing proud against the winter sky. Snowflakes drifted softly down, landing on his hat. For the first time in years, he felt peace, real, solid peace, the kind that money could never buy. He turned to the old couple and said quietly, "Tomorrow the valley starts anew. But tonight, let's rest." They smiled and the firelight danced in their eyes. As the night deepened, Luke looked up at the stars, an endless, cold and beautiful. Somewhere between heaven and the mountains, he whispered, "I'm home, Pa."